Hagar is the only person in the entire book of Genesis who gets to name God. Not Abraham, not Sarah, not Isaac, not Jacob, not anyone with a covenant behind their name. A slave, a foreigner, a woman with no legal standing in the household that owned her. She is the one who says it out loud, and the text keeps her exact word. This video follows every place she got left behind, not one abandonment, several. And it follows them through the actual Hebrew, the words the text chooses right before it moves on, like nothing happened. You're going to see her name change under her twice before anyone admits it out loud. Every name for God so far in this book has been given to someone. This one is different. By the end, you will know why. Hagar, every time she was abandoned and how God found her. Historical context. Where did Hagar come from? Genesis 16 never actually says, but the timing points straight back to a lie her master told, a generation earlier. That's a story for another day. None of that happened in a vacuum either. Sarai wasn't inventing something new when she handed Hagar to Abram. She was reaching for a legal tool her entire world already had a name for. Clay tablets from a city called Nuzi record it plainly. A childless wife could hand her husband a slave woman, specifically to bear a son. The child counted as the wife's own by law, not just by custom. Babylon had its own version. The Code of Hammurabi, carved into stone around 1754 BC, includes a clause for exactly this arrangement. It even anticipates the exact fight you're about to watch happen. The law says if that slave woman starts acting like she outranks her mistress, the mistress can put her back in her place. Someone wrote that down because it kept happening. One more contract survives, from a trading post called Cruelty in what is now Turkey. It adds a detail that makes this story sharper. If the slave woman bore a son, she was supposed to be freed. Freed, not sent away with nothing. Keep that detail. You're going to need it later. Chapter 1, the word that changes under her. Sarai hands Hagar to Abram. The text calls her a shipshah, a word that means something specific. A personal attendant, tied to the household by relationship, not just labor. Hagar conceives almost immediately. And the moment she does, something shifts that has nothing to do with her body. Watch the word because you'll see it change before she does. By verse 6, the text has quietly swapped it. Shipshah is gone. Now she's an Amma. Same woman. Different word. Amma carries no relationship at all. It's a term for property, full stop. Nobody in the story announces this change. No character says it out loud. The narrator just starts using a different word and keeps going, like nothing happened. That's not sloppy writing. That's the text tracking a demotion in real time through vocabulary alone. This is a textbook example of something scholars call an honor-shame dynamic. Status, in this world, was never fixed. It could be taken back through language without a single thing about her daily work actually changing. But there's a wrinkle here. Some scholars, like Savina Tobal, argue Hagar's real status might have been higher than slave suggests in English. They point to the same Nuzi and Hammurabi texts from a minute ago. They say the arrangement gave her something closer to formal standing. The text itself never settles this. Maybe that ambiguity is the point. Chapter 2, a cruelty with a name. Sarai treats her harshly. The Hebrew word is inna. Old commentaries don't read it as a soft word. It implies real physical hardship, forced labor, treatment meant to break someone down, not just cold behavior. Was any of this actually legal by the standards of her own world? You already know the answer from a minute ago. Every text you just heard says yes. So Hagar runs. Pregnant, alone, she takes the road toward a place called Shur. That road runs straight toward Egypt, her own country. She isn't fleeing into nowhere. She has somewhere to run back to. Hold on to that, it's going to matter again later, when it isn't true anymore. Nobody usually connects what happens next. The same Hebrew word, inna, shows up again much later in this book. It describes what Egypt will do to Israel, generations from now. A nation that will include people descended from an Egyptian woman, treated this exact way first. The text doesn't comment on that. It just uses the same word twice, centuries apart, and lets it sit there. Chapter 3, the name no one else gets to give. An angel finds her by a spring, out in the wilderness, not a vision, not a dream. The text treats this as a direct encounter, the same weight it gives Abrams. He tells her to go back, to endure it, and he attaches a promise to that instruction. more descendants than she could ever count. Before she goes, he gives her son a name, Ishmael. It means God hears. Hold on to that word too. It comes back later, and it means something different the second time. No one else in this book has had an angel show up in person yet. Hagar is first. Then Hagar does something no one else in this entire book does. She names God back, El Roi, the God who sees me. That exact phrase appears exactly once in the whole Hebrew Bible. One time, ever. Scholars have a word for that, hapax legomenon, a word or phrase used exactly once and never again. Phyllis Treble, who has written extensively on this passage, points out something easy to miss. God speaks directly to Hagar twice in this story. That's more direct speech from God than Sarah receives anywhere in the whole book of Genesis. A slave, a foreigner, the one the household barely counts as a person. And she's the one who gets to name him. She names the well too, Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. The text doesn't explain why it had to be her. It just lets that fact sit there, unresolved, and moves on. Chapter 4. Sent back into the hand that hurt her. This part doesn't sit easy. God doesn't get her out. He tells her to go back, straight into the hand that hurt her, and submit to it. No rescue, no new household, just return and endure. Some scholars, like Dolores Williams, draw a sharp line here. This isn't a liberation story, it's a survival story. Those aren't the same thing. God doesn't remove her from slavery. God makes it possible for her to survive inside it for now. That distinction matters for everything that happens next. The angel describes her unborn son next, and it sounds like an insult if you don't know the world it came from. A wild donkey of a man. In English, that lands rough. In the ancient world, the wild donkey wasn't shameful. It was proverbial for freedom. An animal that refused the yoke, that lived exactly where it chose. Job even praises it later in the same book for laughing at the noise of the city. So the promise isn't an insult wrapped in a blessing. It's the opposite. Her son will be the one thing she currently isn't, untamed. Chapter 5, a word nobody can translate. Years pass. Ishmael grows up in that household, alongside a half-brother who wasn't supposed to exist yet. Then Isaac is born, and everything Sarah has tolerated for over a decade stops being tolerable. She sees Ishmael doing something. The Hebrew word is metzachek. There's a problem, though. Nobody agrees on what that word actually means. The scholar Aaron Pinker traced how different ancient translations handle it. The Greek version reads it as simply playing. An ancient Aramaic expansion called the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan pushes further, reading it as worship of another god entirely. Paul, writing centuries later, reads it as outright persecution. Same 4 Hebrew letters. 3 completely different stories, depending on who's translating. Whatever it was, Sarah wants them gone. Both of them. And the text doesn't let Abraham off easy here. It says the thing was very displeasing to him, specifically because of his son. Not because it was inconvenient, because it hurt. The church father John Chrysostom leaned into that line hard. He read it as proof Abraham genuinely loved this child, not just tolerated him. This isn't a man shrugging off his firstborn. It's a father being told to do the one thing he doesn't want to do. Chapter 6, the well that was already there. Abraham sends them off, with bread and water, into the wilderness of Beersheba. Not sure this time. Not the road home. This time, it's Paran, deeper into open desert, further from Egypt than she's ever been. The first time she ran, she had somewhere to run to. This time, there's nowhere left. The water runs out fast. She puts the boy under a bush and walks off, far enough that she doesn't have to watch him die. She sits down and cries. Not a quiet cry. The text says she lifts up her voice, but that's not the voice God responds to. Genesis says God hears the voice of the boy. Not her voice, his. And his name, remember, means God hears. The text isn't being poetic here. It's activating the name out loud, at the exact moment it matters. Then this. An angel tells her to lift the boy up, hold him by the hand, because he's about to become a great nation. And God opens her eyes. Not creates a well, opens her eyes. The well was already there. It didn't appear because she needed it to. It was sitting in front of her the entire time, and she couldn't see it until something in her changed, not the ground underneath her. So here's the question you've been building toward this whole video. A slave, a foreigner, a woman with no legal standing anywhere in this story. She's the only person in the whole book of Genesis who gets to name God. Not once. Twice, she has a direct encounter most patriarchs in this book never get. The text never explains why it had to be her. It doesn't apologize for it, and it doesn't resolve it either. It just lets that fact stand there, uncomfortable, unclaimed by anyone else in the story. Maybe that's not a gap in the text. Maybe that's the point. Final chapter. A name nobody repeats. There's a detail in her name you've probably never stopped to notice. Hagar. It likely comes from the same root as the Hebrew word for stranger. Someone dwelling in land that isn't theirs. The same word gets used for Abraham himself, later in his own story. But here's the irony nobody points out. The man named Sojourner ends up with descendants who inherit that exact land. The woman actually named for sojourning gets sent away from it, twice. Maybe you know this feeling even if you've never read this chapter. Belonging that only lasts as long as you're useful. Doors that open for you only while you're needed, and not one day longer. English doesn't really have a clean word for what she went through out there. The ancient world just called it wilderness. Ishmael grows up into an archer out in that same wilderness. And when it comes time for him to marry, Abraham isn't the one who arranges it. Hagar is. She picks him an Egyptian wife, her own country, not his father's. One of the only moments in this whole story where she isn't reacting to something done to her. She's choosing. Jewish tradition didn't let her story end in that wilderness, though. A much later text says Abraham found her again, years afterward, in secret, more than once. Some strands of that same tradition go further still. They say she became his wife again, under a different name, after Sarah died. Scholars who've studied that tradition closely notice the names involved show up centuries later in Islamic tradition too, tied to Mecca, and a well that still exists there. Water still remembered as hers. The story didn't stay inside one religion or inside one ending. Years later, this well gets one more mention, right when Isaac needs it most, after the hardest day of his own life. That's where this story goes next. None of that is written in Genesis itself, beyond that one line about where Isaac had come from. Genesis stops at a well in the wilderness and a promise that her son would live. Renita Weems has spent years tracing how this same book keeps drawing lines between our women and foreign women. Hagar sits right on that line, an Egyptian inside a story that isn't hers by blood. Newer generations of scholars, among them Nyasha Jr. and Andrew Mbuvi, have kept asking why a story about an enslaved foreign woman keeps getting picked back up by people who see themselves in her. Genesis doesn't answer that either. It just gives her the one thing it gives almost no one else in this entire book: a name for God, spoken first by her and never repeated by anyone again.